Hey friends, welcome to part 2 of my Let's Read To the Lighthouse. I'm Olivier Bouchard again. I'm reading To the Lighthouse online for no good reason except I want to share it with people. So I took notes from the last time I did that because I thought I could do some other stuff better. So my first note is speaking the fucking mic. You idiot. Sorry for that. It's, streaming is a process. So maybe on top of everything I would gain from doing this, I will gain, I'll up my streamer skills, which is very important in our fully online future that is happening real soon. Other thing, so I have my water, I have a coffee too. Okay, sorry. Okay, now you can read it. That's why I'm not streaming on Twitch. Couldn't drink in that cup on Twitch. They would censor me or something. Other things. So I was talking to other people about it, and they told me that I should probably interject more. And that's fair, because kind of the idea of that is to interact with the audience a little, and me just reading to the Lighthouse will be pretty boring if I don't say anything, right? Right. So I might try to interject more, but I don't really want to interject that much because I respect, I don't want this to be an ironic joke. I really want to read To the Lighthouse online because To the Lighthouse is a good book that I like, and I want to share it with people, and I don't want to destroy Virginia Woolf's heart by saying dumb shit over it all the time. It would be very easy for me to do this ironically. I think our generation, millennials, are too ironic as people, and we need to be more, I don't know, willingly vulnerable and something. So I don't want to do ironic joke over To Lighthouse, but it's fair that I need to comment a little more and talk a little more, because my real dream while doing this is, when you're on the road at 2 in the morning. It's 2 in the morning. It's 1 in the morning right now for me, because I want to do that without too much noise outside. But there might be a lot of noise because we just won an hockey match, and in Montreal it makes people go crazy. But anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, well, my real dream is be late night radio host, the one you're in between CDs on the road at 2 in the morning, and you cannot catch anything on the radio except that one channel that's very weird, where it's just someone talking very suave, hello, creature of the night. And you realize you're the only person probably listening to that radio show, and the only thing I don't have is music. I'd like to have music to put in between my chapter or stuff, or just talk for a while and then put a song, and then read for a while and then put a song. I cannot do that because YouTube would take me down, sadly. So maybe I'm gonna sing a song somewhere. Not on this part though. Not on this episode. I'm not in the singing mood tonight. Sorry for that. So, I hope you had a good week. You're great, by the way. Much better than me. I should make more effort with that. The thing that is my face. So we last time we read part 1 of the chapter The Window into the Lighthouse. We're now at part 2. So I'm going to read that now. "No going to the lighthouse, James," he said, as he stood by the window, speaking awkwardly, but trying in deference to Mrs. Ramsay to soften his voice into some semblance of geniality at least. "Odious little man," thought Mrs. Ramsay. Why go on saying that? So that was part 2 of To Lighthouse. I could finish the video right now. That'd be funny. I won't. We'll read part 3 together. Just let me get my breath back. Part 3, To Lighthouse, in the mic. "Perhaps you will wake up and find the sun shining and the birds singing," she said, compassionately smoothing the little boy's hair for her husband with his caustic saying that it would not be fine at dash the spirit she could see. Just going to the lighthouse was a passion of his, she saw, and then, as if her husband had not said enough, with his caustic saying that it would not be fine tomorrow, the seduced little man went and rubbed it in all over again. I'm reminded that it's not an easy book to read. There's like comma every 2 words, and it makes the rhythm really weird. It's more like kind of a, I mean, like it's some kind of poetry, which is why I like Woolf that much. But it's hard to read, especially. Remember when we were like in school and teacher had us like read in front of the class or stuff like that. That was the worst. And I'm like repeating that experience at 2 a.m. in my adult years. I don't know what I'm doing. "Perhaps it will be fine tomorrow," she said, smoothing his hair. All she could do now was to admire the refrigerator and turn the pages of the store list in the hope that she might come upon something like a rake or a mowing machine, which, with its prong and its handle, would need the greatest skill and care in cutting out. All these young men parodied their husband, she reflected. He said it would rain. They said it would be a positive tornado. But here, as she turned the page, suddenly her search for the picture of a rake or a mowing machine was interrupted. The gruff murmur, irregularly broken by the taking out of pipes and the putting in of pipes, which had kept on assuring her till she could not hear what was said as she sat in the window, that the men were happily talking. This sound, which had lasted now half an hour and had taken its place soothingly in the scale of sounds pressing on top of her, such as the tap of balls upon bars, the sharp sudden bark now and then, how's that, of the children playing cricket at seas, so that the monotonous fall of the waves of the beach, which for the most part beat a measured and soothing tattoo to her thought, and seemed consolingly to repeat over and over again as she sat with the children, the words of some old cradle song, murmured by nature, "I am guarding you, I am your support," but at other times suddenly and unexpectedly, especially when her mind raised itself slightly from the task actually and had no such keenly meaning, but like a ghostly roll of drums remorselessly beat the measure of life, made one thing of the destruction of the island and its engulfment in the sea, and warned her, whose day had slipped past in one quick doing after another, that it was all ephemeral as a rainbow. The sound, which had been obscured and concealed under the other sound, suddenly thundered hollow in her ears and made her look up with an impulse of terror. That was a long sentence. There was also like live reading in library. Do you imagine, like, normally it was children books, and I realized children books are probably way fucking easier to read than this. Like, do you imagine that the teacher or the person of the library like being with children being, yeah, we're going to read to the lighthouse. And the kid won't understand a single thing except that they're probably going to feel that they're going to die someday for the first time in their life. Maybe some needed it. Maybe some needed that. They had ceased to talk, that was the explanation. Falling in 1 second from the tension which had gripped her to the other extreme, which, as if to recoup her for her unnecessary expense of emotion, was cool, amused, and even faintly malicious. She concluded that poor Charles Tansley had been shed. That was of little account to her if her husband required sacrifice, and indeed he did. She cheerfully offered up to him Charles Tansley, who had snubbed their little boy. One moment more, with her head raised, she listened, as if she waited for some habitual sound, some regular mechanical sound, and then, hearing something rhythmical, half said, half chanted, beginning in the garden, as her husband beat up and down the terrace, something between a croak and a song. She was soothed once more, assured again that all was well, and looking down at the book on her knee, found the picture of a pocket knife with 6 blades, which could only be cut out if James was very careful. Suddenly, a loud cry, as of a sleepwalker, half roused, something about storm at which shut and shell, sung out with the utmost intensity in her ear, made her turn apprehensively to see if anyone heard him. Only Lily Briscoe, she was glad to find, and that didn't matter, but the sight of the girl standing on the edge of the lawn painting reminded her she was supposed to be keeping her head as much in the same position as possible for Lily's picture. Lily's picture, Mrs. Ramsay smiled, with her little Chinese eye and her puckered up face. She would never marry. One could not take her painting very seriously, but she was an independent little creature. Mrs. Ramsay liked her for it, and so remembering her promise, she bent her head. That was part 3. Sure, I'll do part 4 too. I think it's like 9 pages. Yeah, something like that. I'll do part 4 too. Just give me a little. Hope you're enjoying. Only single listener I have, which is probably me. I don't know how YouTube works. Sorry for noise. So I'm doing this live because it makes it easier to record the video after. I don't think, well, I hope some people will find the channel and just enjoy it, like late in the night, alone with a random Quebecer reading books and sharing your thoughts. Time to read. Indeed, he almost knocked her easel over, coming down upon her with his hands waving, shouting out, "Boldly we rode and well, but mercifully he turned sharp and rode off, to die gloriously, she supposed, upon the heights of Balaclava. Never was anybody at once so ridiculous and so alarming, but so long as he kept like that, waving, shouting, she was safe. He would not stand still and look at her picture. And that was what Lady Briscoe could not have endured. Even while she looked at the mass, at the line, at the color, at Mrs. Ramsay sitting in a window with James, she kept a feeler on her surrounding lest someone should creep up, and suddenly she should find her pictures looked at. But now, with all her senses quickened as they were, looking, straining, till the color of the wall and the jack manna, I don't know what's that, and there's a note there, but I'm not going to read it, beyond burned into her eyes. She was aware of someone coming out of the house, coming towards her, but somehow divined from the footfall William Banks, so that Though her brush quivered, she did not, as she would have done had it been Mr. Tinsley, Paul Rayleigh, Minta Doyle, or practically anybody else, turn her canvas upon the grass. But it but let it stand. William Banks stood beside her. I cannot. So two things, I cannot hear how it sounds. So I'm sorry if it's still muffled. I'm as close as the mic as I can. It's kind of weird. Like my setup's kind of weird. Uh, the other thing, I hope my voice and the book voice are different enough for you to differentiate. But if you can't, when I'm saying dumb shit, it's me, and when I'm saying smart shit, it's the book. I feel that's probably a fair way to think about it. Book voice. They had rooms in the village, and so walking in, walking out, parting late on doors mat, that said little things about the soup, about the children, about one thing and another, which made them allies, so that when he stood beside her now in his judicial way, he was old enough to be her father too, a botanist, a widower, smelling of soap, very scrupulous and clean. She just stood there. He just stood there. Her shoes were excellent, he observed. They allowed the toes their natural expansion. Lodging in the same house with her, he had noticed too how orderly she was. Before breakfast, enough to paint, he believed, alone, poor, presumably, and without the complexion of the other men of Miss Doyle, certainly, but with a good sense which made her in his eyes superior to that young lady. No, for instance, when Ramsay bore down on them, shouting, gesticulating, Miss Briscoe, if are certain, understood. Someone had blundered. Mr. Ramsay glared at them. He glared at them without seeming to see them. That did make them both vaguely uncomfortable together. They had seen a thing that they had not been mean to see. They had encroached upon a privacy. So Lily thought it was probably an excuse of his for moving, for getting out of earshot, that made Mr. Banks almost immediately say something about it's being chilly and suggest taking a stroll. She would come, yes, but it was difficult that she took her eyes off her picture. Sorry for that mess up. It happens. Well, you're doing fine. The Jackmana was bright violet, the wall staring white. She would not have considered it honest to temper with the bright violet and the staring white, since she was them like that, fashionable to it was, since Mr. Ponsford's visit, to see everything pale, elegant, semi-transparent. Then beneath the cooler there was a shape. She could see it all so clearly, so commandingly. When she looked, it was when she took her brush in hand that the whole thing changed. It was in that moment's flight between the picture and her canvas that the demon set on her, who often brought her to the verge of tears and made this passage from conception to work as dreadful as any down and a dark passage for a child. Such she often felt herself struggling against terrific odds to maintain her courage, to say, but this is what I see, this is what I see, and so to clasp some miserable remnant of her vision to her breast, which 1,000 forced their best to pluck from her. And was then, too, in that chill and windy way, as she began to paint, that they forced themselves upon her other things, her own inadequacy, her insignificance, keeping house for her father of the Brompton Road, and had much ado to control her impulse to fling herself, thanks heaven she had always resisted so far, at Mrs. Ramsay's knee, and say to her, but what could one say to her? I'm in love with you? No, that was not true. I'm in love with this all, waving her hand at the edge, at the house, at the children. It was absurd. It was impossible. One could not say what one meant. So now she had her brushes nearly in the box, side by side, and said to William Banks, it suddenly gets cold. The sun seems to give less heat, she said, looking about her, for it was bright enough, the grass still a soft deep green. The house stared in its greenery with purple passion flowers and rooks dropping cool cries from the high blue. But something moved, flashed, turned a silver wing in the air. It was September, after all, the middle of September, and past 6 in the evening. So they strolled down the garden in the usual direction, past the tennis lawn, past the pampas grass, to that break in the thick hedge guarded by red-hot pokers like braziers of clear, burning coal, between which the blue waters of the bay looked bluer than ever. Thank God it's September, for then it's June now when everything's too hot and I need to close my air conditioning for this because it would make too much noise. You realize the sacrifice I'm making for the show? I hope you do. They came there regularly every evening, drawn by some need. It was as if the water floated. It was as if the water floated off and set sailing dots which had grown stagnant on dry land and gave to their bodies even some sort of physical relief. First, the pulse of color flooded the bay with blue, and the heat expanded with it, and the body swam. Only the next instant to be checked and chilled by the prickly blackness on the ruffled waves. Then, up behind the great black rock, almost every evening spurted irregularly, so that one had to watch for it, and it was a delight when it came, a fountain of white water, and then, while one waited for that, one watched on the pale, semicircular beach, wave after wave, shedding again and again smoothly a film of mother of pearl. They both smiled, standing there. They both felt a common hilarity, excited by the moving waves. There's anyway, like I really love Virginia Woolf, and she made a book called The Wave too. And it's very good, I think. Am I mistaken? I might be mistaken. I hope I'm not mistaken. I'm sorry. And then by the swift cutting race of a sailing boat, which, having sliced a curve in the bay, stopped, shivered, let its sail drop down, and then, with a natural instinct to complete the picture after its swift movement, both of them looked at the dunes far away, and instead of merriment felt come over them some sadness, because the thing was completed, partly, and partly because the distant view seems to outlast by a million years a lily thought the gazer, and to be communing already with a sky which beholds an earth entirely at rest. Looking at the far sand hills, William Banks thought of Ramsay, thought of a road in Westmoreland, thought of Ramsay striding along a road by himself, on brown with that solitude which seemed to be his natural hair. But this was suddenly interrupted. William Banks remembered, and this must refer to some actual incident, by a hen straddling her wings out in protection of a covey of little chick, upon which Ramsay, stopping, pointed his sticks and said, "Pretty, pretty." An odd illumination into his heart, Banks had thought it, which showed him his simplicity, his sympathy with humble things, but it seemed to him as if their friendship had ceased there, on that stretch of road. After that, Ramsay had married. After that, what with one thing and another, the pulp had gone out of their friendship. Whose fault it was, he could not say. Only after a time, repetition had taken the place of newness. It was to repeat that they met. But in this dumb colloquy with the sand dunes, he maintained that his affection for Ramsay had in no way diminished. But there, like the body of a young man laid up in peat for a century, with the red fresh on his lips, was his friendship in its acuteness, in reality laid up across the bay amongst the sand hills. Yeah, it's kind of, you know, life happens, as they say. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. Might cry before the end of this. I warn. You should cry too. It's a sad book. He was anxious for the sake of this friendship and perhaps too in order to clear himself in his own mind from the imputation of having dried and shrunk, for Ramsay lived in a welter of children, whereas Banks was childless and a widower. He was anxious that Lady Briscoe should not disparage Ramsay, a great man in his own way, yet should understand how things stood between them. Begun long years ago, their friendship had petered out on a Westmoreland road, where then he spread her wings before her chicks, after which Ramsay had married. I have trouble with that word for some reason. And their paths lying different ways, there had been, certainly for no one's fault, some tendency when they met to repeat. Yes, that was it, he finished. He turned from the view and turning to walk back the other way up the drive. Mr. Banks was alive to things which would not have struck him had not those sentinel revealed to him the body of his friendship lying with the red on its lip laid up in peat. For instance, Cam, the little girl, Ramsay's youngest daughter, she was speaking sweet and less on the bank. She was wild and fierce. She would not give a flower to the gentleman, as the nursemaid told her. No, 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 she would not. She clenched her fist, she stamped, and Mr. Banks felt aged and saddened, and somehow put into the wrong by her about his friendship. He must have dried and shrunk. We continue. The Ramsays were not rich, and it was a wonder how they managed to contrive it all. 8 children to feed 8 children on philosophy. I'm sorry, I read a lot of philosophy, and I'm always annoyed when, like you get those people that will say, "Oh, I wish in school they would teach us how to do finance," and but like finance is just like economics are dumb. We should change those to fit better for people, for moral and ethical needs. I was talking to some people in my family about, all the fact that, let's say, hall cups are not good people. And I realized that me and most people in my family had they didn't even have a concept of ethics, like didn't think about what it means to be a moral human, let's say. And I think that's disappointing, and that's way more important than fucking money and ethics. I guess if you're poor and you cannot eat, like philosophy doesn't do the job. But I feel like we should teach philosophy in high school and read to the Lighthouse to children. Here was another of them. Jasper, at this time, strolling past to have shot at a bird, he said nonchalantly, swinging Lily's hand like a pump handle as she passed, which caused Mr. Banks to say bitterly how she was a favorite. There was education now to be considered. True, Mrs. Ramsay had something of her own, perhaps, let alone the daily wear and tear of shoes and stockings which those great fellows, all well-grown, angular, ruthless youngster must require. As for being sure which was which, or in what order they came, that was beyond him. He called them privately after the king and queens of England, Cam the wicked, James the ruthless, Andrew the just, Prue the fair. For Prue would have beauty, he thought, or could she help it, and Andrew brains. We all like positive sexism toward Prue, dude. Should calm down. Wally walked up the drive, and Lily Briscoe said yes and no and capped his comment, for she was in love with them all, in love with this world. He weighed Ramsay's case, commiserated him, and envied him as if he had seen him divest himself of all those glories of isolation and austerity which crowned him in his youth to cumber himself definitely with fluttering wings and clucking domesticities. They gave him something. William Banks acknowledged that it would have been pleasant if Cam had stuck a flower in his coat or clambered over his shoulder, as over her father's, to look at a picture of Vesuvius in eruption. But the lad also, his old friend, could not but feel destroyed something. What would a stranger think now? What did this Lily Briscoe think? Could one help not seeing that had its grew on him? Eccentricities, weaknesses, perhaps? It was astonishing that a man of his intellect could stoop so low as he did, but that was too harsh a phrase. Could depend so much as he did upon people's praise. We all need praise. That's why you need to like and subscribe this video. Am I doing this good? Right. I'm a good streamer. Oh, but, said Lily, think of his work. Whenever she thought of his work, she always saw clearly before her a large kitchen table. It was Andrew's doing. She asked him what his father's books were about, subject and object and the nature of reality, my kind of book. Andrew has said, and when she said heavens, she had no notion what that meant. Think of a kitchen table then, he told her, when you're not there. What an asshole. So she always saw, when she thought of Mr. Ramsay's work, a scubbed kitchen table. It lodged now in the fork of a pear tree, for they had reached the orchard. And with a painful effort of concentration, she focused her mind not upon the silver buzz bark of the tree or upon its fish-shaped leaves, but upon a phantom kitchen table, one of those scrubbed board table, grained and knotted, whose virtue seems to have been laid bare by years of muscular integrity, which stuck there, its foreleg in hair. Naturally, if one days were passed in the seeing of angular essences, this reducing of lovely evening with all the flamingo clouds and blue and silver to a white deal four-legged table, and it was a mark of the finest minds so to do. Naturally, one could not be judged like an ordinary person. Mr. Banks liked her for bidding him think of his work. He had thought of it often and often, times without number. He had said, Ramsay is one of those men who do their best work before they are 40. He had made a definite contribution to philosophy in one little book when he was only 5 and 20. Okay? What came after was more or less amplification, repetition, but the number of men who make a definite contribution to anything whatsoever is very small, he said, posing by the pear tree, well brushed, scrupulously exact, exquisitely judicial. This is probably my contribution to the world, is me reading a book by someone else, so might be the best I ever do. You're there to witness it, you lucky person. Suddenly, as if the movement of his hand had released it, the load of her accumulated impression of him tilted up, and dawn poured in a ponderous avalanche all she felt about him. That was one sensation. Then uprose in a fume the essence of his being. That was another. She felt herself transfixed by the intensity of her perception. It was his severity, his goodness. I respect you, she addressed him silently, in every atom. You are not vain. You are entirely impersonal. You are finer than Mr. Ramsay. You are the finest human being that I know. You have neither wife nor child. Without any sexual feeling, she longed to cherish that loneliness. That's okay. You live for science, have an entourage section of potatoes rose before her eyes. Praise would be an insult to you. Generous, pure, hearted, heroic man. But simultaneously, she remembered how he had brought a valet all the way up here, objected to dogs on chairs, but prosed for hours until Mr. Ramsay slammed out of the room about salt and vegetables and the iniquity of English cook. How then did it work out, all this? How did one judge people, think of them? How did one add up this and that and conclude that it was liking one felt or disliking? And to those words, what meaning attached after all, standing now apparently transfixed by the pear-tree impression poured in upon her of those two men, and to follow her thought was like following a voice which speak too quickly to be taken down by one's pencil. And the voice was her own voice saying, without prompting, undeniable, everlasting, contradictory thing, so that even the fissure and humps on the bark of the pear tree were irrevocably fixed there for eternity. You have greatness, she continued, but Mr. Ramsay has none of it. He is petty, selfish, vain, egotistical, he is spoilt, he is a tyrant. He wears Mrs. Ramsay's to death, but he has what you, Shadwell, Mr. Banks, have not, a fiery unworldliness. He knows nothing about trifles. He loves Doug and his children. He has 8. You have none. Did he not come down in 2 coats the other night and let Mrs. Ramsay trim his hair into a pudding basin? All of this danced up and down like a company of gnats, each shipwrecked, but all marvelously controlled in an invisible elastic net, danced up and down in Lily's mind, in and about the branches of the pear tree, where still hung in effigy the scrub kitchen table, symbol of her profound respect for Mr. Ramsay's mind, until our thought, which had spun quicker and quicker, exploded of its own intensity. She felt released. A shot went off close at hand, and then came flying from its fragment, frightened, effusive, tumultuous, a flock of startling. I have nothing to add other than this beautifully written. Jasper, said Mr. Banks. They turned away. The startling flew over the terrace. Following the scatter of swift-flying birds in the sky, they stepped through the gap in the high hedge, straight into Mr. Ramsay, who boomed tragically at them, somewhat at blunder. His eyes glazed with emotion, defiant with tragic intensity, met theirs for a second, and trembled on the verge of recognition, but then, raising his hand halfway to his face as if to avert, to brush off in an agony of peevish shame their normal gaze, as if he begged them to withhold for a moment what he knew to be inevitable, as if he impressed upon them his own childlike resentment of interruption. Yet even in the moment of discovery was not to be rooted utterly, but was determined to hold fast to something of this delicious emotion, the same pure rhapsody of which he was ashamed, but in which he reveled. He turned abruptly, slammed his private door on them, and Lady Briscoe and Mr. Banks, looking uneasily up into the sky, observed that flock of startling, which Jasper had rooted with his gun at settled on the tops of the elm trees. And that's part 4. I hope you enjoy me reading to Lighthouse. So last week I put so like that's my still radio show idea, is to have like, you know, I just want to put a song or something. I'd love to interrupt the thing with music, but I'm just gonna recommend a song. Last week it was Deaf Haven, I think, their new single, which is like a lot calmer of what they usually do. They're a metal band, even though like metalhead don't like them that much, because like normies that are not metalhead like me like Death Haven and like the metal crowd are gatekeeper, and gatekeeping sucks. Anyway, last week it was a new song from Death Haven. I think I'm gonna put like so I like pop music, and Marina, or formerly known as Marina and the Diamonds, as a new album, which is like all her albums. I think it's up and down. It's not her best, but there's good stuff in it. So I think I'm gonna link a song from her because she does good stuff. and it's hard to do good, smart pop, and she does that. So props to her. I hope you like me reading this. I'll do more. I have to now. I have to finish the book at least. Um, and I'll continue to talk about stuff. I don't have much to say today, except what I've already said, but we'll have fun together. So, like, you're supposed to like and subscribe if you like the thing. But you do whatever you want. And we'll see you again. Bye bye.